Bullies took a veteran's inhaler during an asthma attack, but the Royal Guard was watching everything. The morning had started quietly, with a soft golden light spilling over the city square. The streets were filled with a gentle hum of activity, vendors calling out to sell their fresh fruits and handmade crafts, children laughing as they chased each other past the fountains, and tourists stopping every few steps to take photographs of the historic buildings. Among the crowd, a man moved with a calm, deliberate pace. His name was James Parker, a retired veteran who had served his country with courage and discipline for many years. Even though he was no longer in uniform, there was a quiet strength in the way he walked, a presence that seemed to command respect without needing words. James had always loved mornings like this. There was a serenity in the air, a feeling that the world was just waking up and that anything could happen. But there was also a routine he had to follow closely. James had asthma, a condition that had become part of his life after years of exposure to harsh environments during his service. He carried his inhaler wherever he went, a small, familiar device that had saved him countless times. It was a reminder of his vulnerability, yet also a symbol of how he had learned to manage challenges with careful attention. As James walked through the square, he noticed the familiar faces of local shopkeepers greeting him with warm smiles. They remembered him from previous visits, often stopping to ask about his health or to share stories about the community. James smiled politely at each person, returning their greetings with a gentle nod or a brief word. He enjoyed these small interactions. They reminded him that life, despite its difficulties, was filled with simple joys and human connection. But not everyone in the square shared this sense of goodwill. In a shadowed corner near the edge of the plaza, a group of teenagers had gathered. They were loud, boisterous, and full of the careless energy that often comes with youth. Their laughter carried across the square, drawing attention, but it was a different kind of attention, one tinged with mischief. They watched James as he approached, whispering to each other and exchanging glances that carried an unmistakable challenge. James noticed them out of the corner of his eye. He had encountered rude or disrespectful people before, and he had learned long ago not to let such behavior disturb his peace. He continued walking, keeping his posture upright and his expression calm. Inside, however, a small tension began to build. There was something in the way the teens stared at him that felt different, more deliberate, more threatening. The first signs of trouble appeared almost imperceptibly. James felt a slight tightness in his chest, a warning signal that his body sometimes gave him before an asthma attack. He knew the feeling well, having experienced it many times over the years. It started as a minor discomfort, almost easy to ignore, but he recognized that ignoring it could be dangerous. He adjusted his pace slightly, inhaling slowly and trying to focus on the rhythm of his steps, telling himself that he could handle it. But the teens were growing bolder. They began moving closer, their voices rising into mocking tones. "Hey, old man," one of them shouted, "why don't you show us your tricks?" Their laughter followed each word, sharp and grating against the otherwise peaceful morning. James kept his eyes forward, trying not to react, but a seed of anxiety had been planted. The gentle morning was starting to feel constricted, the space around him shrinking as if the square itself had grown smaller and more hostile. James reached for his inhaler, a natural reaction to the tightness in his chest. But as his fingers searched his pockets, a wave of panic swept over him. The inhaler was gone. Confusion and fear intertwined in a momentary rush of disbelief. How could it be missing? He always carried it with him, always kept it close. His heart began to race, not just from the physical strain of his asthma, but also from the sudden realization that he was vulnerable in a crowded place. The teenagers noticed his struggle immediately. Their laughter intensified, now crueler and more mocking. One of them stepped forward and, with a quick motion, snatched the small inhaler from James's hand before he could react. The device, so essential to his survival, was held up like a trophy. The boy waved it mockingly, and the group burst into raucous laughter. James's mind raced. He knew that every second without the inhaler could make his condition worse. His breathing grew shallower, and the wheezing in his chest became more pronounced. Passers-by began to notice the situation. Some froze, unsure how to react, while others whispered to each other, pointing toward the confrontation. James tried to speak, to explain that he needed the inhaler, but the words came out as gasps, rough and uneven, swallowed quickly by his rising panic. In that critical moment, the royal guard, stationed nearby for routine security, noticed the scene unfolding. They had been observing the square quietly, their disciplined eyes catching even small disturbances. When they saw James struggling and the teenagers laughing at his distress, they understood immediately that intervention was necessary. The guards moved with purpose, their presence commanding attention without causing additional fear. James, though aware of the approaching authority, felt a mixture of relief and embarrassment. Relief because someone trained and responsible was coming to help, embarrassment because he had never imagined himself in such a vulnerable position in a public space. But there was no time for hesitation. Each breath he took was a struggle, a reminder of the fragility of life and the importance of small devices like his inhaler that often go unnoticed until they are needed most. Meanwhile, the teenagers, oblivious to the seriousness of the situation, continued their teasing. They did not fully grasp the consequences of their actions, treating the inhaler as a toy rather than a life-saving device. This gap in understanding, combined with their youthful arrogance, made the tension in the square almost unbearable. Spectators began to murmur, some moving closer to watch, others stepping back, unsure whether to intervene or leave it to the authorities. James's thoughts flickered between fear and memories of his service. He remembered the discipline, the training, and the countless situations where he had faced danger head-on. Yet now, in a seemingly mundane city square, he felt the vulnerability of a single human being, reliant on the kindness or cruelty of strangers. It was a strange and humbling realization, one that reminded him that courage is not only about facing large, obvious threats, but also about navigating the smaller, everyday challenges of life. As the royal guard approached, their calm, measured steps cut through the tension. James felt a glimmer of hope. He inhaled slowly, trying to steady himself, knowing that the immediate danger could be mitigated if help arrived in time. The crowd sensed the shift in energy as well. The laughter of the teenagers began to falter slightly as the guards closed the distance, their authoritative presence impossible to ignore. Even in the midst of panic, James took a moment to appreciate the precision and discipline of the royal guard. Their ability to assess a situation quickly, act decisively, and maintain order was a testament to the training and values they embodied. In a life-or-death moment, such qualities were not abstract concepts. They were literal shields between chaos and safety. By the time the guards were close enough to intervene, James's breathing had become noticeably labored. His chest tightened with each inhalation, and beads of sweat formed on his forehead. The inhaler, once so securely in his pocket, remained out of reach, now a symbol of both his dependence and the vulnerability that even the strongest individuals face. The situation, which had started as a simple morning stroll, had escalated into a confrontation that highlighted the fragility of life, the recklessness of youth, and the unseen guardians who watch over public spaces. This morning in the square, with sunlight glinting off the cobblestones and the air filled with the tension of a brewing crisis, marked the beginning of an extraordinary incident. It was not simply about an inhaler, a group of bullies, or even a single veteran's struggle. It was about human fragility, the unexpected dangers in everyday life, and the presence of people trained to protect and serve at the right moment. James stood there, chest heaving, eyes fixed on the approaching figures of the royal guard. In that moment, he realized that life, much like his morning walks, was unpredictable. It demanded vigilance, patience, and sometimes the grace of others who intervene when circumstances threaten to spiral out of control. And though fear had gripped him moments ago, he now felt the first threads of relief begin to weave through the tension. The morning continued around him, the vendors, the children, the tourists, but for James, the world had the air and the square had changed. What had started as a quiet, sunny morning now felt heavy with tension. James Parker, the veteran, stood frozen for a moment, his chest tightening as he realized the inhaler, the small device that had always been his lifeline during an asthma attack, was no longer in his possession. The teenagers, sensing his struggle, held it above their heads, their laughter ringing across the square. It was cruel and thoughtless, yet to them it seemed like a harmless prank. James's heart raced. Each breath felt shorter than the last, his chest contracting painfully. He tried to call out to explain how serious the situation was, but his words came out as gasps. "Please, I need it," he managed to choke out. His voice was weak, barely audible over the chatter of the crowd and the mocking laughter of the teens. Panic surged within him. He had faced dangerous situations on battlefields, situations that demanded courage under fire. Yet this seemingly ordinary moment was one of the most frightening he had experienced. The teenagers, still unaware of the severity of their actions, began to move around, teasing James further. One waved the inhaler back and forth, making it just out of reach. Another mocked him, mimicking the wheezing sounds he made. The group was caught up in their own amusement, not considering that a single inhaler could mean the difference between life and serious danger for the veteran. Around them, people began to notice the unfolding situation. Some spectators paused, uncertain whether to step in or call for help. Others whispered anxiously to each other, pointing out James's labored breathing. A few people moved closer, but they hesitated, unsure if they could approach the teenagers without escalating the situation. The square, which had seemed safe and lively only moments ago, had transformed into a tense arena of uncertainty. Meanwhile, the Royal Guard had been observing quietly from a distance. They were stationed at key points throughout the city for security purposes, trained to notice disturbances even when they seemed minor. When the guards saw the group of teenagers surrounding James, holding his inhaler and laughing, they understood immediately that this was not merely a prank. It was a dangerous situation. James's gasping breaths, the desperation in his eyes, and the tension radiating from the crowd made it clear that intervention was required. The guard captain, a man named Sergeant William Harris, had served in the Royal Guard for over 20 years. He had encountered many challenging situations, from managing large crowds to handling emergencies in public spaces. He knew that in moments like this, swift but careful action was necessary. Any sudden movement could cause panic or provoke the teenagers, so he instructed his team to approach calmly but decisively. As the guards moved closer, James felt a small wave of relief. The disciplined presence of the Royal Guard was reassuring, a stark contrast to the chaotic energy of the teenagers. He tried to straighten his posture, though each inhalation was a struggle. The world seemed to narrow to a few critical elements: his inhaler, his breath, and the approaching guardians who could restore order. The teenagers, noticing the guards, hesitated for the first time. Their laughter faltered as they realized that authority figures were closing in. One of them made a nervous joke, trying to maintain bravado, but it lacked conviction. The air between the two groups was charged, youthful recklessness on one side, calm but firm authority on the other. Sergeant Harris approached with a steady, commanding voice. "Hand over the inhaler," he said. There was no anger in his tone, only firm authority. "The man needs it immediately. This is not a joke." The teens exchanged glances, uncertain how to respond. The inhaler, once a source of amusement, now seemed heavier in their hands. The seriousness in the guard captain's voice, combined with the visible signs of James's struggle, made them pause. Fear began to creep into their faces, replacing the smug expressions they had worn moments before. James, sensing that help was close, reached out toward the inhaler, his movements slow and deliberate. The guards positioned themselves strategically, ensuring that if the teens made any sudden moves, they could respond without causing harm. One of the younger guards spoke gently to the teenagers, explaining the danger of withholding a life-saving device from someone with a medical condition. His words were clear and simple, appealing to their understanding without threatening them unnecessarily. Slowly, the tension began to shift. The teenagers, realizing the gravity of the situation, extended their hands reluctantly and returned the inhaler. Sergeant Harris handed it immediately to James. Relief washed over him as he brought it to his mouth, inhaling the medicine that would ease the tightening in his chest and restore his breathing. The wheezing that had been growing louder began to fade, replaced by the slow, steady rhythm of air filling his lungs. The crowd around them exhaled collectively. Spectators who had been holding their breath began to move closer, some offering words of concern, others nodding in silent approval of the guards' swift action. James felt a profound sense of gratitude. He had experienced fear, vulnerability, and the fragility of life in those moments, yet now he was safe, thanks to the calm, decisive response of trained professionals. The teenagers, still visibly shaken, received a firm but fair lecture from the guards. They were reminded that their actions, though seemingly harmless in their eyes, could have had serious consequences. The guards spoke not with anger, but with authority, making it clear that public safety and respect for others must always come first. The teens listened, their expressions a mix of shame, understanding, and lingering disbelief at how quickly the situation had escalated and then resolved. James, finally able to breathe comfortably again, took a moment to steady himself. The adrenaline that had surged through his body began to ebb, replaced by a reflective calm. He looked around at the crowd, at the guards, and even at the teenagers, feeling a mixture of emotions. Relief, gratitude, and a quiet sadness that such a dangerous moment could arise from thoughtless behavior all coexisted in his mind. As the crowd began to disperse, James spoke quietly to Sergeant Harris, thanking him and his team for their vigilance. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't been here," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. Harris nodded, acknowledging the gratitude without seeking recognition. For the guards, protecting the public was not about praise. It was about duty, preparedness, and acting decisively when needed. The teenagers, now calmer, began to understand the consequences of their actions more clearly. One of them apologized directly to James, his voice trembling slightly. "We didn't know it was so serious," he admitted. The veteran nodded, accepting the apology with quiet dignity. There was no anger in his response, only a lesson learned. Sometimes education and empathy are more powerful than punishment. In the aftermath, the square returned to its usual rhythm. Vendors resumed their calls, children continued their play, and the golden morning light softened once more over the cobblestones. Yet for James, the experience left a lasting impression. It was a reminder of the fragility of life, the unpredictability of everyday encounters, and the importance of vigilance, not only in guarding oneself, but also in observing the needs of those around us. He reflected on the courage it took, not only to serve in the military, but also to navigate the small, unexpected challenges that life presented. Even something as ordinary as a walk in the square could turn into a moment that tested patience, awareness, and human kindness. And in that moment, the presence of the Royal Guard had been more than protection. It had been a lifeline, a testament to the value of training, preparedness, and compassion in ensuring that order and safety are maintained in public spaces. James continued his walk slowly, inhaler safely in hand, his mind replaying the events of the morning. He considered the lessons learned by everyone involved, the teens, who had been given an opportunity to understand the impact of their actions, the crowd, reminded of the importance of awareness and community support, and himself, reminded that even the most experienced and resilient among us rely on the care and vigilance of others at critical moments. As he left the square, James's thoughts were calm but thoughtful. He had faced danger many times before, but today's incident had been a unique combination of fear, vulnerability, and relief. It highlighted the importance of empathy, the consequences of carelessness, and the quiet heroes who observe and intervene when needed. The morning had started with laughter and routine, but it had transformed into a powerful lesson about life, responsibility, and the profound impact of small acts of attention and courage. The immediate danger had passed. But the morning in the square was far from ordinary. James Parker, the veteran, was still catching his breath, his chest gradually returning to normal thanks to the inhaler he now clutched tightly in his hand. The crowd that had gathered began to murmur among themselves, some moving closer to see what had happened, while others whispered in disbelief at the scene they had just witnessed. The square, once filled with the soft sounds of routine life, laughter, chatter, footsteps on cobblestones, now hummed with tension and curiosity. The teenagers, the source of the commotion, stood a few steps away, their faces pale and expressions guilty. The adrenaline that had made them bold just moments ago had vanished, replaced by a sobering awareness of the seriousness of their actions. They looked at the veteran with hesitant apologies, unsure of what to say or how to make amends. The inhaler had been returned, but the memory of James's struggle and the fear that had crossed his face weighed heavily on them. Sergeant William Harris, the captain of the Royal Guard who had intervened, stepped forward with calm authority. His voice carried a weight that immediately captured the attention of everyone present. "You must understand," he said to the teenagers, "that what you did could have had serious consequences. This man's life was at risk. You cannot treat such situations as a joke." The teens listened quietly, their earlier bravado gone. One of the younger boys who had first snatched the inhaler shifted nervously from foot to foot. "We didn't know it was so dangerous," he admitted. His voice was small, almost drowned by the murmurs of the crowd, but it carried a genuine note of regret. Sergeant Harris nodded, acknowledging the confession. "I understand that you may not have realized the danger, but ignorance does not excuse your actions. You need to think about how your behavior affects others." His tone was firm yet fair, emphasizing responsibility rather than punishment. The guard's words were deliberate, meant to teach a lesson that the teens would remember. Meanwhile, James had slowly regained his composure. He could feel the medication from the inhaler easing the tightness in his chest, allowing him to breathe normally again. Yet, his mind was still racing with thoughts about the incident. He thought about the unpredictability of life, about how even small actions, like snatching an inhaler in jest, could turn into something potentially life-threatening. He looked at the teenagers, seeing fear and regret in their faces. Despite the panic he had felt moments ago, he felt a sense of empathy. These were young people, still learning about the world and the consequences of their choices. James took a deep breath, feeling stronger now, and spoke calmly. "I'm not angry," he said, his voice steady but carrying the weight of experience. "What you did was dangerous, but it's also a chance to learn. You need to understand that actions have consequences, and sometimes those consequences can be serious." His words were not just directed at the teens. They were a reflection of his life experience, his understanding of mistakes and the lessons they bring. The teenagers listened intently. One of the girls, who had been standing slightly behind the others, spoke up timidly. "We're really sorry," she said. "We didn't think it would be so serious. We just thought it was a prank." Her voice wavered, showing genuine remorse. Sergeant Harris acknowledged her apology and added, "It's good that you recognize the mistake. Now, the important thing is to take responsibility and make sure you don't repeat it." Part of growing up is learning to see beyond the momentary fun and understand the impact on others. The teens nodded, their expressions slowly shifting from fear to understanding. James observed this interaction with a quiet satisfaction. The presence of the Royal Guard had not only prevented a potential tragedy, but had also turned the situation into a learning experience. The teenagers were not being punished harshly, but they were being guided to understand responsibility, empathy, and the value of life. It was a moment that reflected the power of calm authority and thoughtful intervention. As the square began to return to its normal rhythm, James noticed the reactions of the spectators. Many had remained at a distance, watching the events unfold. Now they began to approach cautiously, offering words of concern and support. A young mother whispered to her child about the importance of helping others, while an older man commented on the courage it took for both James and the guards to face the situation calmly. The atmosphere in the square shifted from tension to reflection as people considered the lessons of the morning. James decided to take a few steps toward the edge of the square, still holding the inhaler but feeling more in control. He reflected on how quickly life could change, how ordinary moments could become extraordinary through unexpected events. The incident reminded him that vulnerability is not a weakness, it is a natural part of life. What matters is how people respond to danger, to mistakes, and to the needs of others. The Royal Guard remained nearby, maintaining a watchful presence. Their training had prepared them for countless scenarios, yet each situation was unique, requiring judgment, empathy, and quick thinking. Sergeant Harris observed James and the teenagers, ensuring that the situation remained calm. The guard captain's thoughts were methodical, considering how best to guide the young people while keeping the veterans safe. It was a delicate balance, one that required both authority and understanding. James felt a renewed sense of gratitude. He thought about his years of service, the discipline he had learned, and the courage it took to face danger in distant lands. Yet he realized that bravery is not only about facing large, obvious threats. Sometimes it is about navigating the smaller, everyday challenges, like trusting strangers to respond appropriately or managing one's own vulnerabilities with patience and composure. The morning had provided him with a vivid reminder of these truths. The teenagers, having calmed down, began to disperse slowly, guided by the guard's instructions. They had learned that their actions, even when meant in jest, could have unintended consequences. Each step they took away from the incident was accompanied by reflection, a silent acknowledgement of the lesson they had just experienced. The Royal Guard ensured that they left the square safely, their behavior now more cautious and aware of the responsibility that comes with freedom and movement in public spaces. James, still holding his inhaler, took a moment to breathe deeply. The square had returned to its usual state, the vendors calling out their wares, children laughing, and tourists taking photographs. But the events of the morning had left a permanent impression. He realized that life often presents unexpected challenges, and the measure of a person is not only how they face danger but also how they respond to vulnerability and the needs of others. A young boy approached James cautiously, curiosity in his eyes. "Sir," he asked, "are you okay now?" James smiled warmly. "Yes, I'm fine," he replied. "Thank you for asking." "It's important to look out for each other." The boy nodded thoughtfully, turning back to his family, perhaps carrying with him a small but meaningful lesson about awareness and empathy. As James prepared to leave the square, he reflected on the role of the Royal Guard. Their presence had been more than just enforcement of rules. It had been a demonstration of care, preparedness, and human responsibility. They had intervened without aggression, guided without harshness, and ensured that the situation resolved safely. In that calm but decisive action, James saw a model for how society could function with empathy, vigilance, and respect for human life. The morning sun climbed higher, casting a warm glow over the square. James felt a sense of closure for the events that had unfolded. The inhaler, once a symbol of his vulnerability, now represented resilience and the importance of preparedness. The Royal Guard's intervention had not only protected him physically, but had also provided a moment of moral clarity, teaching both the teenagers and the public the value of responsibility, respect, and the consequences of thoughtless actions. He paused for a moment, looking at the faces of the guards who had ensured his safety. "Thank you," he said sincerely, his voice carrying over the square. Sergeant Harris nodded, acknowledging the gratitude with humility. The guards returned to their posts, their presence a quiet reminder of the unseen protection that exists in public spaces, always ready to act when necessary. James took a final deep breath, feeling the crisp morning air fill his lungs fully. The city square, once the scene of tension and panic, now felt restored. Life continued around him, ordinary and yet transformed by the events of the morning. The teenagers had learned an important lesson. The crowd had witnessed the importance of vigilance and empathy, and James had been reminded once again of the unpredictable nature of life and the value of preparedness, both physical and moral. As he walked away from the square, James felt a quiet sense of peace. The incident, though frightening, had been a powerful reminder of human connection, responsibility, and the impact of thoughtful intervention. He carried with him the knowledge that courage takes many forms, not only on distant battlefields but also in everyday life, where small actions can mean the difference between safety and danger, fear and relief, chaos and calm. The day slowly moved on, and the city square that had earlier witnessed tension and panic now returned to a quiet, gentle rhythm. The vendors resumed their calls, offering fresh fruits, flowers, and handmade items. Children laughed as they chased each other near the fountains, and the tourists resumed their pictures, capturing the beauty of the historic buildings. Yet, for James Parker, the veteran who had just experienced one of the scariest moments of his life, the day carried a sense of calm reflection mixed with a deep awareness of how quickly ordinary life could change. Even though the immediate danger had passed, James could still feel the residual tightness in his chest. Each breath, now steadier thanks to his inhaler, reminded him of his vulnerability and of the importance of preparedness. He carried the small device close, a symbol not only of the medical support it provided, but also of the fragility and resilience of human life. The morning's events had left a lasting impression on him, highlighting the unexpected challenges that could arise even during a simple walk in a public space. James slowly walked through the square, observing the people around him. He noticed how life had seemingly gone on without pause. The children's laughter, the hum of the marketplace, and the tourists' curiosity all continued as if nothing had happened. And yet, he knew that a small but profound change had occurred in the hearts and minds of some of those who had witnessed the incident. The Royal Guard had not only ensured his safety, but had also demonstrated the value of vigilance, compassion, and thoughtful intervention. The teenagers who had caused the incident were nowhere in sight now, likely returning to their homes, thinking about the events that had unfolded. James reflected on them with a mixture of empathy and concern. They were young, full of energy and curiosity, yet their actions had nearly caused serious harm. He understood that youth often comes with mistakes, and what mattered most was that they learned from them. Perhaps, he thought, this would be a moment that guided them toward greater understanding, responsibility, and kindness in the future. James remembered how the Royal Guard had intervened. Their calm and firm presence had made all the difference. They had approached the situation with authority, but without aggression, speaking to the teenagers in a way that demanded respect while also teaching an important lesson. It was clear to James that their training was not just about security, but also about understanding human behavior, managing crises, and protecting life in its many forms. Their actions had transformed a potentially dangerous moment into a meaningful lesson for everyone involved. As he walked, James thought about his own reactions during the incident. The fear he had felt, the panic as he realized his inhaler was gone, and the relief when the Royal Guard returned it to him. All of these emotions were vivid and unforgettable. Even though he was a veteran who had faced life-threatening situations before, this experience reminded him that courage was not only about facing enemies in distant lands. It was also about facing vulnerability in everyday life, trusting others, and responding thoughtfully under pressure. The crowd that had gathered earlier continued to disperse, but some lingered, quietly observing James as he moved through the square. Many seemed inspired by the calm and composed way he handled himself despite his struggle. Others were struck by the efficiency and humanity displayed by the Royal Guard. It was a rare combination, they realized, to witness both a moment of human vulnerability and the swift, compassionate response of trained professionals. James stopped near a fountain, the sound of water providing a soothing backdrop to his thoughts. He reflected on how small acts of attention, like the presence of the Royal Guard, could have a profound impact on safety and well-being. Their ability to notice subtle signs of danger, assess the situation quickly, and respond effectively had ensured that no harm came to him. It reminded him that society often relies on quiet guardians, people whose work may go unnoticed until a critical moment arrives. At that moment, a young girl approached cautiously, holding the hand of her mother. "Sir," she said softly, "are you okay now?" James looked down at her, a gentle smile forming on his face. "Yes, thank you," he replied. "Everything is fine now. Remember to always look out for each other." The girl nodded, a serious expression crossing her young face, as if she had understood a small but important lesson about care, responsibility, and the importance of awareness. As James continued his walk, he thought about the broader lessons of the morning. The incident had not only been about an inhaler or an asthma attack, it had been about human behavior, empathy, and the interconnectedness of society. Each action, no matter how small, had the potential to affect others in meaningful ways. A moment of thoughtlessness could cause panic and danger, while a moment of vigilance and care could save lives and teach enduring lessons. Later, James made his way to a nearby cafe to rest and reflect. He sat quietly, sipping water, and allowed his mind to replay the morning's events. He considered the courage it took for the Royal Guard to approach the situation calmly, knowing that any misstep could escalate tensions. He also thought about the teenagers, realizing that this moment could become a turning point for them. Through guidance, understanding, and careful intervention, they had been given a chance to learn about responsibility, respect, and the value of life. James felt a deep sense of gratitude toward the Royal Guard. He thought about the countless times they served silently, maintaining order, observing, and intervening when necessary. Their role went beyond enforcement. It was about protection, education, and sometimes saving lives in unexpected ways. This realization reinforced his respect for the institution and the individuals who dedicate themselves to public safety with dedication, courage, and humanity. The day moved forward, and James returned home later in the afternoon. He shared the story with his family, recounting the fear he had experienced and the relief he felt when the Royal Guard intervened. His family listened attentively, expressing concern and admiration. They were proud of the calm and strength he had shown, and they also appreciated the lessons learned about vigilance, empathy, and human kindness. The story became more than a personal experience. It became a tale that highlighted the importance of community, responsibility, and the impact of small but significant acts of care. James also decided to share his experience with his local veterans group. He spoke about the importance of preparedness, the role of the Royal Guard, and the lessons for young people who may not understand the consequences of their actions. The group listened with interest, many nodding in agreement. His story served as a reminder that even ordinary moments in public spaces could teach extraordinary lessons about humanity, compassion, and resilience. Over the next few days, James noticed subtle changes in the community. People seemed more attentive, more willing to help, and more aware of those around them. The incident had sparked conversations about empathy, responsibility, and the importance of watching out for one another. Teachers spoke to their students about being considerate, and community leaders praised the Royal Guard for their effective and compassionate intervention. It became clear that the morning's events, though frightening at the time, had created a ripple effect of positive reflection and awareness. James often reflected on the concept of courage. He realized that bravery was not only about facing enemies or physical danger. It was also about acknowledging vulnerability, seeking help when needed, and responding with composure under pressure. Courage could manifest in small, quiet ways, as seen in the disciplined actions of the Royal Guard, or in the measured patience and understanding he himself had shown during the incident. It was a reminder that resilience is multifaceted, and that true strength often includes empathy, awareness, and the willingness to learn from experiences. As the sun set over the city, James looked out from his window at the square below. The fountains sparkled in the fading light, and the evening crowd began to fill the streets once more. Life continued, ordinary yet enriched by the lessons of the day. James felt a sense of peace, knowing that the incident had not only tested him, but had also taught valuable lessons to the teenagers, the spectators, and the community at large. He realized that moments of crisis, while challenging, could also reveal the best in people: the courage to act, the wisdom to guide, and the empathy to understand and forgive. In the weeks that followed, James continued to share his story whenever the opportunity arose. He spoke at community events, schools, and veteran gatherings, emphasizing the importance of preparedness, awareness, and compassion. He highlighted the critical role of the Royal Guard, explaining how their quick thinking had not only saved his life, but had also turned a dangerous situation into a learning opportunity for everyone involved. His story inspired others to consider how small acts of vigilance and care could make a meaningful difference in their daily lives. Through this experience, James Parker learned a profound truth: life is unpredictable, and even ordinary moments can carry extraordinary significance. The fear he had felt that morning, the struggle to breathe, and the relief brought by timely intervention, all of these elements combined to create a lasting impact. It reminded him that humanity is interconnected, that vigilance and compassion are essential, and that every individual has the capacity to influence the safety and well-being of others. Looking back, James could see the events of that morning as a story of resilience, empathy, and human connection. The incident with the teenagers, the swift action of the Royal Guard, and the collective awareness of the crowd had transformed a frightening moment into a powerful lesson. It was a reminder that life is full of unexpected challenges, but with courage, awareness, and compassion, even the most difficult situations can lead to understanding, growth, and positive change. As night fell, James reflected quietly, feeling a sense of gratitude for the lessons learned and the people who had helped him. The inhaler, now safely in his possession, was more than a medical device. It was a symbol of preparedness, vigilance, and the value of human life. The Royal Guard's intervention had ensured his safety, but it had also inspired him to think deeply about responsibility, empathy, and the importance of looking out for one another. The morning's events remained etched in his memory, not as a moment of fear, but as a story of hope, courage, and the enduring impact of kindness and vigilance. James knew that he would carry these lessons with him for the rest of his life, sharing them whenever he could, reminding others that even in moments of vulnerability, human connection, preparedness, and empathy can turn fear into relief, chaos into understanding, and danger into A lasting lesson,